today. We're going to talk about USC and the coaching situation as well here shortly. We're going to talk about the AD situation. As you can see right behind me, the Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum here in LA. And right now, the eyes of the world turn to LA Exposition Park as the Trojans take on the Utah Utes tonight. And in a stunning coincidence, Urban Meyer will be there on the field, along with USC heavies like Matt Leinart, Reggie Bush for the Fox telecast. So a complete and total circus. And, of course, that's the way it should be when it comes to USC. So we're going to be giving you some scoops here about the USC coaching situation, the AD situation more particularly. I mentioned earlier today on my Twitter feed, if you follow me at SportsbyBrooks on Twitter. And then also I mentioned it on this show earlier this week that if USC is blown out, they're massively embarrassed tonight, Clay Helton's going to be fired. Now, if they lose, and when I say blown out and embarrassed, look for something in excess of 5 touchdowns. Now, of course, the odds of that happening, very, very slim. I recognize that. But I think more importantly, from my sources close to the USC Board of Trustees and the administration, more specifically, President Carol Folt, USC President Carol Folt, who was inaugurated yesterday at USC. To make it official, she is your USC president after 15 years in the same capacity at UNC. I've got sources close to both her and Rick Caruso on the USC Board of Trustees. And what I'm hearing is if there's a big blowout, Helton's going to be gone. And so USC is of the mind to get rid of him during the season. They're of the mind to fire him before an AD is hired. And I think that's extremely interesting when you're trying to understand the dynamic of what's happening at USC. Already, Carol Folt has cleaned house. There are pending lawsuit judgments against USC, leading to hundreds of millions of dollars being paid out by the school in damages to victims of sexual assault by an OBGYN at USC, who is there for decades, and USC covered it up. And so she has come in and begun the process of firing people. It's been a bloodbath inside the USC faculty and the administration and the athletic administration to a certain extent. We've seen Lynn Swann fired. So Carol Folt is clearing out the dead wood. She's trying to reinvent what has always been an incestuous culture inside. Of course, you have that from most major universities, but particularly at USC, and it's a private school. So as you look at the AD situation and the coaching situation, the fact that Lynn Swann has been fired, and that opens the door for Helton to be let go without an AD in place, that may say a lot about the power of Carol Folt, making a statement, perhaps. I think if the trustees had it their way, it might be the opposite. And when I say trustees, I'm talking about money. I'm talking about donors. But let me run down quickly what I mentioned on Twitter I was going to do. And coming up later in the show, we're going to talk to the #1 fantasy football guy on video every day in the country, and that is Brad Evans, Yahoo Noise. He works for Yahoo Sports, but he's Yahoo Noise on Twitter. You got to follow him. He's amazing. And I'm really excited to have him on the show. And he's coming up here shortly for fantasy football. We're going to talk fantasy football. We haven't done it all week. And now with the NFL coming up this weekend, we're going to get our fix with him and talk some of the big picture stuff, some of the key things going on. I think especially at the quarterback position, what to make of that, because so many of you out there have lost your quarterbacks on your fantasy team. Also later on, a guy who likes to stir it up. And if you follow college football and you're on Twitter, You know who Dan Wolken is. Dan Wolken, USA Today national columnist, college football, college basketball, a longtime guy who was in Memphis, now in Atlanta. And we're going to have him on. That's all I'll say. But it's never a dull moment with Dan. Great guy. It's going to be interesting, though. Might be a little prickly. Who knows? And then coming up at the top of the hour, Jeff Cavanaugh, 105.3 The Fan. We loved him out of Dallas last week, so we're having him back. And honest to God, this is not hyperbole. I mean, on the radio, somebody doing a show on radio, I would say Jeff Cavanaugh probably is the most knowledgeable guy on radio doing a daily show in the country when it comes to the Dallas Cowboys. And now you've got another soap opera playing out with the Taco Charlton kerfuffle. The 2017 top pick of the Dallas Cowboys being waived this week, and Charlton going out on Twitter, making his feelings known. The Dolphins claim him, and there's no better person who's going to break that crazy situation down. I think the only thing more entertaining than New York teams, New York professional teams like the Mets, the Jets, the Giants, the Yankees, the Knicks, the Nets, the only thing more entertaining than those teams crashing and burning, which is just the height of hilarity. And with Twitter, it's the greatest following that whole disaster as it hurtles through space in slow motion. And now we have this gift of Daniel Jones under the tree coming up this weekend. The only thing more entertaining than the New York sports being in the toilet is Jerry Jones and the Cowboys in all circumstances. He's the greatest. So we're going to talk to him coming up in a bit. Jeff Cavanaugh, 105.3 The Fan. And this is a guy who knows that situation inside and out. We're also going to talk gambling. Yep. Going to talk betting. Yep. And that'll be brought to you by mybookie.ag. And then at the end of the show, and I've been meaning to get this guy on all week, Doug Lesmerises, who is a longtime Cleveland reporter, columnist, tremendous. But he did an amazing piece on Urban Meyer, and Urban Meyer clearly is campaigning for the job. It's not a coincidence that he's going to be on the field today at the Coliseum as the sort of Damocles dangles over Clay Helton. And as I told you, he could be gone as early as tomorrow, later tonight, or he could be gone in the bye week if USC spits the bit, stinks it up against Utah. Maybe not to the extent where it would be a massively embarrassing blowout tonight, but let's say it's a loss, and then they take another loss at Washington that's ugly, no progress, fired in the bye week before Notre Dame. That game for USC is at Notre Dame. So we're going to talk to Doug Lesmerises. He had the best article I've seen so far on Urban Meyer, in which, in my opinion, Urban Meyer is essentially campaigning for getting back into college football. In other words, USC. So that's coming up. But now, and I'm going to get to USC. Just hold your horses. I'm going to get to USC. I'm going to give you those names of USC athletic director. I don't want to call them candidates. Carol Folt, president of USC, has a wish list. She has a wish list of possible candidates that she's interested in. I'm going to tell you who's on that wish list. And there's one person in particular on that AD wish list for Carol Folt that if he were to get hired at SC would mean Urban Meyer would be coming as a package deal. All right, that's coming up. But first, let's go out and talk to Brad Evans of Yahoo Sports, Yahoo Noise. One word, Yahoo Noise on Twitter. It's Lesmerises, Doug Lesmerises. I got it right. Doug Lesmerises. Cam Smith, our producer in Boston, helping me out there. But Brad Evans is going to be joining us here shortly. Yahoo Sports, the greatest, the best guy. And I just mentioned this earlier, Brad, when it comes to video, and I know you're an award-winning guy, but you really deserve it. You do a great job on fantasy football, and I appreciate you joining us.
Hey, my pleasure. I am recuperating from #Tequila Thursday, which lived down to the hype last night with the Titans and Jaguars. What a hideous, disgusting game. I cannot believe Marcus Mariota is still a starter in this league.
Yeah, first of all, when you talk about quarterbacks, this has been, contextualize this for us. Have you seen this sort of rash of injuries, or where so many guys woke up on a Monday and realized, my team's effed?
No, this is unprecedented. This early in the season, quarterback historically for fantasy purposes, the safest position out there in terms of bust rates. I've been tracking the bust rates for the last decade, and on average, it's around 25% every year for the quarterback position. You compare that to like RB1s drafted, it's around 45%. Wide receiver ones around 38%. So again, this is almost unreal what we are seeing. With the likes of now Mason Rudolph in the saddle, Luke Falk, the third stringer for the Jets, going up against the vaunted New England Patriots. Drew Brees out. Could be a quarterback by committee with Teddy Bridgewater and Taysom Hill. I'm playing Kyle Allen in a couple of leagues this week. It looks like he's going to draw the start for the Carolina Panthers going up against Arizona in that secondary that is thin, to say the least, and has given up 8 pass yards per attempt. So, yeah, it's wild, it's wacky, and I love the unpredictability of fantasy. This is why we play the game.
Absolutely. And what I was going to say was, when it comes to these quarterback situations, out of all of them where we've lost big-time quarterbacks, when it comes to the fill-in guy, is there one guy, or is there any quarterback that you think may be worth taking a long-term flyer on?
Yeah, I do like Mason Rudolph quite a bit. What I would love to see with Mike Tomlin is just fully install the Mike Gundy system from Oklahoma State. You got 2 guys that can certainly run it. One, of course, taking snaps in Rudolph, and another guy on the wing in James Washington. And those guys made beautiful music together down there in Stillwater as people were smashing beverages in their honor at Eskimo Joe's. And I think there's a real good shot that Rudolph could step in and be at least above average. He knows the system. He throws a fantastic deep ball. I'm not downgrading Juju Smith-Schuster. I think Vance McDonald may see a slight uptick. He scored a pair of touchdowns last week when Vance McDonald came in relief of Roethlisberger, or Mason Rudolph came in relief of Roethlisberger. So, I think the sky, is there a limit? Yes, obviously, but he could be a top 15 quarterback moving forward. But I am still really interested to see what Sean Payton does with Taysom Hill because of his multi-dimensionality, a guy that's a Swiss Army knife of sorts. If he gets a majority of the snaps, or, let's say Teddy Bridgewater goes out and has a stinker of a first quarter, and all of a sudden the offense is turned over to Hill, I think it could be a ton of fun to watch the scheming that Payton does with a guy that has so many tools in the box.
Now, I hear you hear one or two things about Teddy Bridgewater. Teddy Bridgewater, experienced guy, they're going to be fine. He's a game manager. He'll keep the seat warm for when Breeze comes back. And then you hear, can't play. It's over. His career is over. Can you demystify Teddy Bridgewater for us?
Yeah, I think he's just pedestrian. I don't think there's, really a whole lot of upside with him, even in a great offensive situation. You have arguably one of the best wide receivers in the game in Michael Thomas, who he was force-feeding last week. Jared Cook, a plus tight end. Alvin Kamara, obviously one of the elite running backs in terms of scoring duality in this league. You got a premium offensive line as well. But, Teddy B last week was just meh. There was nothing exciting about his game. You go to the ice cream shop, it was just nothing but vanilla being served up. 5.5 YPA, completed less than 60% of his attempts. He was just an average quarterback, even with the Minnesota Vikings in his heyday. A guy that only netted 7.2 pass yards per attempt in the couple of years when he was, at the controls up there in the land of 10,000 lakes. So for me, again, I think it's a short leash. If he struggles early on against the Seattle Seahawks, Great Northwest, you're going to see a lot more Taysom Hill than expected.
So when you look at running backs, and this is also another eternal debate that's been going on in the NFL, and it's really heightened, I think, over the last 5 years or so, is the value of running backs. Of course, the guy's getting beaten up, and then you seemingly see people overnight lose it and you never know when that time's going to come. Example might be Todd Gurley. It might not be. That's one of the great mysteries of the universe. We have the Sphinx, and then we've got Todd Gurley. What's going on with the knee? But how do you view running backs in this day and age in fantasy football?
Yeah, it's a case of either you're in a timeshare or you're a true blue workhorse, and there's very little in between, and that's kind of the frustrating thing about this game, and that's why guys like Saquon Barkley, Zeke Elliott, Christian McCaffrey, they're stallions.
So it's such a dice roll. I mean, what's your philosophy on where you're going to prioritize?
Well, I'm going to invest in guys, even though they are perishable, they're flammable by nature. They can spark at any time in a bad way, much like Nissan Field last week in Nashville. You just never know. There could be a fire, and you got a guy with a Home Depot extinguisher trying to put it out. Everybody's like, "Oh, it's totally cool. Everything's fine. Nothing to be concerned here." But I'm still going to invest in those guys that are proven commodities, despite maybe the wearing tread on the tires. If they're in ideal situations. Now, Saquon's certainly not, but the offensive line, I think, has performed better so far this season. I think Daniel Jones is an upgrade over Eli Manning, and Saquon's just such a unique asset, and considering that he squats elephants in the gym, it's ridiculous the size of his thighs. You hope he's going to hold up, and that's all you really hope and pray for in fantasy is that your investments in these high-end running backs, you're hoping that they can sustain health, they can sustain positivity. You're hoping that they don't morph into what Joe Mixon's become in the early going, a guy that suffered a low-grade ankle sprain and has struggled because he is in a quagmire of an offense behind an offensive line that lost yet another starter this week. So, you take it day by day in fantasy land, but dims the brakes in a game that is violently based, and, there's a lot of turnover year in and year out.
Yahoo Sports, he's Yahoo Noise on Twitter. And when you're evaluating, let's just say your own team, forget about everything else, you're trying to win. What are you looking at every single week when you're evaluating your team in an area like an offensive line, or maybe something that's a non-traditional place? Where do you prioritize when you're trying to figure out who you're going to play and who are you prioritizing in terms of scoring? But not necessarily the scores, the things that might play a role in that.
Yeah, when you're looking at it from a fantasy perspective, I'll give you an excellent case in point. I think one of the most valuable metrics to look at are, cornerback data and how they match up against a particular wide receiver. For example, a guy like DeAndre Baker right now, rookie for the New York Giants in that secondary. The Giants have been dreadful. That is putting it mildly defensively. They've given up 10.6 pass yards per attempt. And it's not necessarily Jackrabbit Janoris Jenkins who is the culprit there. It's Baker, who's given up a perfect passer rating in 2 games. So then you go and analyze, where does he line up typically? Who's he going to see the most of in that matchup this weekend against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers? And then you just draw a simple
You also have to account, though, and we saw this a little bit with Jalen Ramsey yesterday. He's getting beat, but he's getting beat on good balls. I think that's one of the great dilemmas, and that's where I think it sets a guy like you apart, where you've got data and you can rely on that. But my sense is the guy who's going to win the pool with 100,000 people, he's literally watching film and maybe recognizes that perhaps week to week that data isn't always correct depending on the quarterback. Just in terms of the specific example you gave, that's why there's just a mountain of stuff to account for.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Many variables at play, and recency bias is a factor. That psychology comes in. People are going to look at Jameis Winston, and they're like, I want nothing to do with this dude. His game is in Davy Jones's locker right now. It's been so horrendous. So why on earth would I put my eggs in that basket? Well, you can actually use that to your advantage, especially if you're playing like DFS. If you're in the Yahoo DFS universe and those GPPs, those guaranteed player pools, people are going to veer away from a Jameis Winston just based on what they've seen recently with their own 2 eyes. Knowing though that even though the matchup is favorable, look, I can't trust the guy, but that means he could have a low ownership. So, I think you can use that to your advantage, and certainly Jameis Winston in a prime position to bounce back. I think it's at least 275 yards and a pair of touchdowns this week. And yes, I do have him in my Yahoo DFS lineup at $23.
Brad Evans of Yahoo Sports, fantasy expert, joining us. Kyler Murray, what say you?
Well, look, I was his strongest advocate entering the regular season. I have not budged. I thought last week, even though the numbers didn't necessarily verify, I thought he proved a major point. He went on the road, he faced an intimidating foe in the Baltimore Ravens, and he was able to move the ball pretty seamlessly up and down the field vertically. Over 300 yards now in consecutive games. Yeah, the YPA isn't the greatest, but you got to remember this offense is predicated on a lot of short pass plays. They nickel and dime you and eventually take the big shot downfield, and he's certainly done that with Larry Fitzgerald, who is just stiff-arming Father Time right now. I mean, he's doing backstrokes and the fountain of youth. He's looked tremendous. So, for me, I'm a big, strong fan of Kyler Murray. I think he's going to take off at home this week against Carolina. I really love Arizona, by the way, catching points at home there in the desert, especially with Cam Newton out, though I do like Kyle Allen to a certain extent. But, yeah, I'm a firm believer that Kyler Murray is going to be a QB1 in fantasy leagues, 12-teamers moving forward. And, again, take Arizona on the money line this week. I don't think you're going to regret it. Cam's in trouble, man. I've got a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach that this thing is going to snowball in a negative way for him, and it could lead to surgery. We'll see. They're trying to rest his injured foot right now, but he's not planning. As a result, he's had the shoulder repaired now twice, and passes are sailing on him. We saw it last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. He should have had a couple of touchdowns to Curtis Samuel if he hits him in stride. Samuel would have taken it to the house. DJ Moore had a touchdown opportunity that was spoiled by a bad toss from Cam as well. He's just not right now. And quite honestly, I think Kyle Allen, given the current physical state of Cam Newton, is an upgrade for the Carolina Panthers. I still believe in Cam, the player, when he's at 100%, but he has a -2 rush yards right now. So for fantasy purposes, is he expendable?
Yeah, interesting.
Yes.
Well, I also wanted to ask you about a couple of other guys, and you mentioned earlier Mason Rudolph, the quarterback of the Steelers. Where are you on him? Is this a guy you could throw in with right now?
This week's a difficult matchup. Going on the road to San Francisco, a defense that I think is overachieved. They have given up just 6.4 pass yards per attempt. But again, I think this offense, if they just go 4 to 5 wide and say screw it, and they're just going to chuck it all day long, that fits Mason Rudolph to a T. I mean, he's got the weapons around him. I worry about James Conner's health, though he did practice in full today, so it looks like he's going to be good to go. We've seen a stack run 38.1% of the time. But, the Steelers defensively have some issues that benefits a quarterback from a fantasy perspective because it raises the floor of opportunity and volume. I think this week he's borderline top 20 guy. Rest of season, though, I think Mason Rudolph will have his moments. I would not be shocked if he's, say, like a top 17, top 18 quarterback moving forward. Field.
Antonio Brown, what are you seeing? Is this a guy you might invest in, and you're thinking maybe this is a ground floor, he may explode? Not that he's not a known quantity, but he is in kind of a strange situation here. What have you seen so far, and what do you think the potential there is?
Well, I mean, the potential here is a top 10 wide receiver like he's customarily been in his career, right?
System. I mean, I know you're watching it closely. What do you think that he's going to flirt? Yeah. My indication was Brady really bent over backwards to try to get him involved in the offense, which might have been a good sign to start things off.
Yeah, exactly. It was a force feeding, and it was the Miami Dolphins are essentially a directional school in college at the level that they're playing at right now. I think
we got to stop and appreciate that one. Nicely done.
I mean, seriously. I mean, they're Florida's southern state. I don't know. I mean,
throughout the East. Right. I love it.
It's just terrible, man. So, and of course the Jets aren't going to be a fair measuring stick either because the Jets have certainly their issues defensively right now. But Antonio Brown, obviously, I mean, just give the New England Patriots the Lombardi Trophy now. If he is able to stave off any punishment, any discipline from the NFL, if he can avoid the exempt list, which is looking increasingly likely, that could be an outcome for him. I mean, the Patriots are just spoiled rotten. They really don't even need him. I mean, Josh Gordon's a stud. He's one of the most physical receivers off the line, still playing at a high level. Julian Edelman, we know what he can do. You've got Sonny Michel to be the tough man between the tackles. James White is a trusted weapon of Tom Brady in the short field. Rex Burkhead can do a little bit of everything. He's kind of a jack of all trades. Philip Dorsett had a couple of touchdowns in week 1 and had his moments. It's just ridiculous. I'm sick of the narrative with the Patriots, but they're so damn good, and we should just sit back and appreciate it.
I really appreciate this, Brad. This has been awesome, and hopefully you'll come back, Dan. Thanks a lot for stopping by. I really appreciate it.
Muchas gracias, amigo. Best of luck
Brad
to you.
Evans of Yahoo Sports, and I told you, that's like a full court press. That's like 94 by 50. That's like picking you up right after a basket is scored. They pick you up man-to-man. He is kind of the equivalent of it. Brad Evans, we appreciate him stopping by. Good information, though. Not just hyperbole, not just a little bit loud, right? Good information. Nobody knows his stuff better than that guy. And gave us, and here's the thing. What I love about fantasy football, fantasy sports, especially guys like Brad, and there's many others. We had another one on, another guy, one of the OGs, Evan Silva, on early on in the show here in the first 3 weeks of Sports by Brooks on Fancred. Is there's a lot to be learned. Obviously, these guys do the research about the teams. So I'm asking him about Mason Rudolph, and he's doing a lot. This is Brad Evans here today. He's doing the analytics. He's doing all the research. He's looking up, the opposing cornerbacks this week. So that's very instructive as to how things are going to play out on the field. So I think sometimes we wall off things like fantasy and to a certain extent betting. That's becoming more and more mainstream now. But those things should all be intermixed with the analysis you're going to see on a typical show. Let's say ESPN's Get Up. I mean, to me, you've got to have fantasy people like a Matt Berry, and I know they have their own thing, but this is how I feel about it. I think you've got to, if I'm ESPN, I'm intermixing, and it's not necessarily a narrative where, you're going to invest these dollars, allocate this, or it's going to be like a play this guy situation. It's just great knowledge of what's going on. And I think that, we need to have both a data-driven analytics analyst there, along with the person who tells you what they're seeing, has the experience, has the contacts. I think that that's something that we're going to try to achieve on this show, bringing in fantasy people on a regular basis, bringing in betting, gambling people on a regular basis. And in fact, we're going to have a great one coming up at the top of the hour. Jeff Cavanaugh, who is the expert on the Dallas Cowboys, at least on radio, doing sports radio in Dallas, 105.3, The Fan, brought to you by mybookie.ag. That's coming up at the top of the hour. Jeff Cavanaugh, he's going to achieve for us, I think, exactly what I'm talking about. Give us a lot of insight into the Cowboys from a analytics perspective to a certain extent. Film guy, he's there all the time. So we'll go to him here at the top of the hour. But first, we want to welcome in Dan Wolken from USA Today, national columnist. Been following him forever. He is a market mover on Twitter. Dan Wolken, USA Today national columnist. And so, Dan, forgive me, but as you know, I was off Twitter for a while, but I know you're in Atlanta, right? You're in Atlanta now, right? So how long have you been in Atlanta?
Almost 7 years.
Okay, 7 years. And so, but you were in Memphis before.
Yeah, I've been in Memphis, I guess, 2006 to end of 2010. They had a nice run there.
So give us an evaluation, Memphis versus Atlanta.
Oh,
what do you think?
Two totally different cities. I mean, Atlanta's a major metropolis, huge international city with all kinds of, corporations, people moving in from everywhere, huge transplant city. Memphis is a lot different.
You got the varsity there.
Got the varsity. I am not a varsity fan. I know it's an institution, but it's a little too greasy for me. But Memphis has great food. Atlanta's got good food. Think about Atlanta, you're right in the middle of the hub of college football, and especially in my job, got an incredible airport, so I can get anywhere pretty quickly.
Now, but what about Memphis? You're kind of we didn't get much, right? Tell us about that. What do you think?
Awesome town. Loved my time there. Met a lot of great people. I, at the time, was covering college basketball. John Calipari, great years with the Memphis Tigers, and it was a lot of fun. It was a crazy ride. A lot of controversy, a lot of success, a lot of intensity on that beat, and learned a lot about how to to cover a team, and it was a blast. And I love the town. I mean, I think it's really underrated.
So let's face it, you've got a dream job. When you think about dream jobs, to me, if you're a sports person, you're a college sports person, you have almost as good a job as it gets. Talk about what that job is, kind of your week to week.
Well, it is a great job, and I'm really fortunate to have it. And I get to do a lot of different things. I can kind of set my own agenda. Part of working for a national publication like USA Today is that I can kind of come up with different stuff and pursue it. And they give me a lot of freedom to do that. But a lot of what I write will be college sports because that's my expertise. That's my wheelhouse, and try to do a mix of news and commentary and features and investigations and all kinds of stuff. So really, whatever kind of rises to the top is what I do, and whatever the hot issue of the day is, I can weigh in on. So it's pretty great. What
are your thoughts on Urban Meyer and his situation?
Well, Urban's obviously somebody who is tortured. I think when he's coaching, he's tortured because he's devoting so much energy to it. It, quite literally makes him ill.
Now, wait a minute. And I'm not saying he's faking, but coming out of Florida, I think there were a lot of people that were saying he was faking, didn't believe him. I think the Ohio State thing, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to think, but there's still a lot of people in that school. But I'm of the mind coming out of Ohio State that there's something there.
You can accuse Urban of maybe being a little bit of a drama queen.
Right.
Fair enough. Okay. But there's no doubt he had health issues at Florida. He had health issues at Ohio State. The stress of those jobs is real, and he internalizes it, and it makes him ill. So yes, I think in that respect, he's tortured. He's also tortured when he's not coaching because it's what he knows. It's what he loves. It's what he wants to do. So I think when you're stuck in between those two things, it's difficult. And will he coach again? I don't know. I think it'll have to be the exact right situation in a program that can win a national championship. I don't think he's just going to go to some random place. I tend to believe that he will take more time off from coaching if he even coaches again. I don't think it's fait accompli that he's back on the sidelines next year.
Did you read, and we're visiting, of course, with Dan Wolken of USA Today, a national columnist, college football, college basketball. Did you read the comments that he provided Doug Lesmerises of the Cleveland Plain Dealer?
Yeah, I saw that, yeah.
I mean, was that not an indication to you that he's still got the fire or not?
Well, yes, but there's a difference between having the fire and wanting to do it versus actually taking the step of saying, okay, I'm going to take over this program and this is going to take up all my time. And the other thing that might happen too is, at the end of the year, he may feel differently. I think, Urban is one of those guys who very emotional, very feel oriented, and what his frame of mind is today may be different in 3 months. So I don't want to read too much into it, but there's no doubt when you leave coaching and do something else, I think for anyone, it's a difficult transition.
What are your thoughts on USC making a decision to hire him? Do you think that's the right thing for USC to do at this juncture? Or I mean, coming out of the Zach Smith stuff, I mean, do you think it's the right thing to do for USC to do that?
I think with Urban, going into it that he is going to build a program very quickly that will have a lot of success, but there's also going to be a lot of drama and a lot of baggage that comes along with him. That's how it's been everywhere, and it's not going to change if he does it again. So I think if you're USC, you have to determine how much you want to put up with that, and maybe it's worth the price. I mean, if you care about winning a national championship and want someone who is a 100% slam dunk to get you back into the conversation, whether, it may only be for 4 or 5 years and then he'll burn out like he's done everywhere else. But within that 4 or 5 year window, you're going to experience a lot of success. If that's what you want, then you should hire Urban. If you don't want that and you would rather maybe somebody who's a little less drama, a little more low maintenance, but also a little riskier, then I think you should go another direction.
Do you think Urban could do for the Pac-12 what Dabo has done for the ACC in going to USC, if he does?
Well, I think if Urban went to USC, it would put USC back up at the top of the Pac-12, transcend the Pac-12, which is what USC used to do. The Pac-12 has never been a conference that has had a bunch of programs that are set up to win national titles. In fact, USC and then,
Washington.
Is Washington really set up to win national titles? I mean, I know they had one under
it once upon a time. I think it was under Don James. They had a very long run. But I get what you're saying. I think that, hey, we're in the Rose Bowl every year. That doesn't mean you're contending for national titles. But I get your point that I think that maybe the Pac-12 is kind of overrating itself. Kind of my point was, though, when you look at Dabo and what you just described with Urban, my point would be that Dabo, one man, has transcended the ACC. Not so much even Clemson, because it's a function of Dabo and the people he's brought in. And he's kind of keeping the ACC in football on the map. I believe that Urban could do the same thing, and this represents a dream opportunity because he's got low-hanging fruit on the schedule. He's got an unbelievable recruiting ground. He's got alumni who are dying right now. I just think that this is an unbelievable opportunity for him.
Yeah, I mean, again, it goes back to when you're a coach of a high stature and you're saying, okay, where is it possible to win at the highest level? I think Washington, you can get to a playoff, but I don't know if you can recruit well enough to win a championship. Oregon, you can get to the playoff. I think it's questionable whether you can recruit well enough overall to win a national championship. USC, you can do that. But there's also some issues with it. I mean, I don't think it's as automatic and as easy as some people think, because if it were, more people would have done it. I mean, there's really only one guy in the last 50 years who's been able to do that. So I do think that maybe it's not quite as idealized of a job as some people want to make it out to be, but it's a great job. The right person there can knock it out of the park. You could be the dominant power on the West Coast. There's no doubt about that. But, I don't know. I mean, it's just timing's a real issue with Urban. I don't know if this is the right time. And I don't know if USC, the president there, Carol Foltz, coming in, she's new. I don't know who the athletic director is going to be. So I think there's a lot of questions.
What do you think of the Mark D'Antonio situation again popping up? It's popped up before, keeps popping up. I mean, are we getting to the end with Mark D'Antonio?
Yeah, I think we probably should be, to be honest with you.
Right.
And this was a very ugly scandal, and it's gone back a couple years. I think when you're at Michigan State and you're trying to compete with Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State, which they've been able to do, you take some risks on kids maybe who have some questionable things in their background or some baggage, and you try to make it work. And I think D'Antonio in this particular case, it clearly blew up on him. If what is in that legal complaint is accurate, I think it's a really bad look. But combined with sort of where the program is, the inability to change and evolve offensively, there's just sort of, I think, some exhaustion setting in. He's been there a long time. I think any coach who stays more than 10 years at a school risks kind of the wear out factor. And he's not winning at the highest level like he used to. So I wouldn't be surprised, just given his age and all the factors, if this is the last season.
We're visiting with Dan Wolken, USA Today columnist. He specializes in college football and college basketball. And I want to ask you kind of a general question. It's kind of a tough question, but I've said in the last few months, we have entered as far as college football goes, a post-NCAA phase. The NCAA is still around, serving as an empty storefront, as a pretense not to compensate the players. That's why it continues to exist. But when you look at the fact that we haven't had a major college football player ruled, and I'm talking about a star, ruled ineligible, dating back to the controversy surrounding, I guess, Cam Newton, and that didn't happen. So we're to the point now where we don't have any NCAA violations that are major. We don't have any scandals within the school. And I mean, what do you make of that? Now that it's just rolling along. We don't have the NCAA logo on any of the college football playoff. We don't have it on the field. We don't have it on the helmet. We don't have the NCAA logo on the 150 logo. I I mean, it's not really a question.
Well,
I'm just kind of rambling, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah, you have to go back to the landmark Supreme Court ruling, which was Oklahoma Board of Trustees versus the NCAA. At that time, the NCAA,
in the mid 80s.
You're right. The NCAA controlled the television rights, and there were very few college football games on television. That Supreme Court decision essentially granted conferences, schools, control over the right to broadcast their games, which has led to an explosion in the television money and the popularity of the sport. And ever since then, I mean, really, the NCAA has not had anything to do with football other than provide the playing rules and within the general structure of NCAA rules in terms of eligibility and all of that stuff. So as far as the postseason, the NCAA's never controlled that for the FBS. It's always been the bowls and the conferences. So, it's sort of two separate things under one umbrella. I mean, if you're sort of getting at, is there going to be a breakaway? I'm skeptical for a variety of reasons, one of which I think the schools like having the NCAA around as sort of the punching bag.
I don't think they're going anywhere. I think, as I said before, Dan, I think the NCAA is the pretense they've got to have,
right,
the empty storefront, to not pay the players.
Right.
To break away is to become a professional.
Right. Well, I mean, look, nobody knows what's going to happen in 5 and 10 years as far as what the media landscape is going to look like. At some point, there will be a grab for more money. What does that look like? Does that, certainly one extreme iteration of it could be, the 30 schools that have the most value in college football, they break away and form, sort of an NFL style league where they pool their television rights and sell them as one big block to the networks like the NFL does. Would that make them more money than what they have now? But nobody knows what the landscape is, because nobody knows what cable television is in 10 years.
What do you think about what's coming down the pike? SB 206 in California, granting potentially in 2023 college football, college basketball players at schools like UCLA, SC, Cal, Stanford, Fresno State, the ability to benefit financially from their likeness, from their name. That's going to happen, or at least it'll be ensnarled in litigation, but it's on the path to happening. And now we see the other legislatures responding. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to go in this story before we have a clear picture of what it's going to look like. We'll see how many more states join in. We'll see if there's momentum behind the federal legislation that has been drafted and is kind of sitting there in Congress, that the Republican congressman from North Carolina, whose name I'm forgetting at the moment, has tried to push. The NCAA, I think, will make an argument within the courts that California, you can do this as a state, but that doesn't supersede what the membership rules of our organization are. At which point, you fight it out in court. Does it end up in the Supreme Court, which has not really been interested so far in looking at college sports issues? Maybe that's the solution that the NCAA wants, frankly, is for, just to fight this all the way to the top and have the Supreme Court say, here's what we're going to rule, and here's what you have to abide by, and then they adapt to that. Who knows? I think major reform and a system that allows athletes to partake in name, image, and likeness rights will happen at some point. It's just, what form does it take? How long does it take to get there? What happens in between? That's part of the drama of it. We don't know yet.
We got to get that EA Sports game back. That's what's fueling it. I know. I hear a lot of people keep talking about it, keep blaming Ed O'Bannon about it. We're talking to Dan Wolken, USA Today columnist specializing in college football, college basketball. And I want to talk quickly about the college football playoff. And there's been talk about expanding it. And of course, Barry Alvarez of the Big Ten, Larry Scott of the Pac-12, they want to expand it for obvious reasons, because those teams aren't good enough to get in right now. We could have, now that you've got LSU coming out of not necessarily nowhere, but LSU might be a candidate for the college football playoff. You might have a whole mess of SEC teams taking over. What What do you think the prospects are of expanding it? And do you think that it's going to take the TV networks writing a check for that to happen, or could it just come from the conferences?
Well, first of all, one of the things that we've never quite figured out and no one's really said is, did the TV networks want to write a bigger check for this thing? Do they, because we've seen now with the 14 playoff what the audience is on ESPN, and it's been some years it's been better than others. Does ESPN really, are they real excited about going in and spending another $1 billion on this? No one's really answered that, but it's not as simple to go from 4 to 8 or 4 to 6 or whatever. It's just sort of snapping your fingers. There's a lot of logistical issues that will go into it, and it's a heavy lift to get all that right. Just one of the things to think about, you've got a playoff, and the first round, if it goes to 8, would certainly be on college campuses. So how do you figure out on a weekend in December how to get a football team and thousands of fans on short notice into a town like Clemson, South Carolina, which has, very little in terms of hotel rooms and, one road in, one road out. I mean, it's so all these things have to be done on short notice if you have a playoff. And
but I mean, when you look at what Jim Delaney did with the Big Ten and bringing in a Rutgers and having the conference tournament at the Garden, and that basketball scheduling is so ridiculous. I mean, you're talking about the fans, but let's talk about the athletes. The Big Ten basketball schedule is so ridiculous. To call those athletes student athletes is a farce. It just comes down to, is someone going to be there to write a check? And I think in the case of what you're talking about in the college football playoff, if there is a John Skipper type guy willing to write the check because he created the college football playoff, I think what you're talking about, and believe me, I'm with you, and I went to the University of Georgia, and I've been at Clemson and been in these situations, the logistical nightmare of it all. But I really think it just comes down to what you said at the very beginning. Is there an appetite of the network to do it? And I don't think there is right now.
Well, I'm not saying this stuff can't happen. It can, but it's a heavy lift. There's a lot of stuff you have to go through, and I don't think you just snap your fingers and make it happen overnight. I think it's a multi-year conversation to get to that point. If there is an appetite, a desire to go to 8, and again, the conference commissioners have been a little bit reticent to do that. The thing is, those people are changing. They're retiring. They're leaving those jobs. New blood's coming in. Those guys are going to be a little bit more open to change. But that, like you said, I do think the network part is key. Does ESPN or whoever want to pay more for 4 more games?
Last thing for you, Dan. It's in your neck of the woods. I guess the big game, to me, the big game of the week is Texas A&M and Auburn. That's the game I want to see. Looking forward to that game. But of course, Notre Dame and Georgia. Now, I went to the University of Georgia. We're all kind of excited about it, but you think we'd learn after a while with Notre Dame. I mean, I think it's going to be a big blowout, and find something to do in the go play badminton in the backyard during the second half, because I don't think there's going to be much to watch there. But what are your thoughts on that game?
Well, yeah, Georgia's favored by 2 touchdowns. It's obviously going to be a crazy atmosphere. Georgia's really good. Their defense has been tremendous this year. And offensively, they're able to get a lot of production from guys like DeAndre Swift. Jake Fromm's a really experienced quarterback who, is probably not the best arm in the country, but really has a great chemistry, has a great sort of knack for making big plays. So I think Georgia wins the game. I think it could be a little bit more competitive than some people think. I think, Georgia may be a little over-amped in the beginning. I can see Notre Dame kind of getting out to a 7 or 10-0 lead, and Georgia kind of grinding them down in the second half. I actually think it'll be a pretty good game. I hope it is, because I'll be there, and I'd like to see a pretty dramatic finish.
Man, I wish I was going to be there with you. Enjoy yourself coming up this weekend, man. I really appreciate you stopping in and taking the time. Nice to meet you. Nice to finally see you.
Thanks, Brooks.
Thanks, Dan. That's Dan Wolken of USA Today, national columnist, college football, college basketball. And we're going to be talking coming up to Doug Lesmerises, who was the guy who did this story with Urban Meyer. I got some really interesting comments from him. Also coming up, Jeff Cavanaugh of 105.3 The Fan. And so what I was thinking was to give me a little space here, if possible, Cam, to talk about what we were going to talk about, but we can do whatever you want to do in this spot. We can go ahead and bring in, if you want to bring Jeff in now, we can do that. That's cool. So let's bring in Jeff Cavanaugh of 105.3, The Fan. Jeff Cavanaugh's Cowboys coverage is presented by mybookie.ag, where they will double your deposit with the promo code Fancred. So let me repeat that. I kind of butchered it. Jeff Cavanaugh's Cowboys coverage presented by mybookie.ag, where they'll double that deposit. They'll double, like Darren Ravel, they'll double down. They'll double your deposit with the promo code Fancred, Fancred. Thanks a lot, Jeff. I appreciate you stopping by, man.
What's up, Brooks? How you doing, buddy? Great job on the read there. Great job.
All right. What kind of dog do you have? Was that a dog I heard?
Okay, so we got the Bulldog Molly, and then we got the Chow Mutt Stomp, and Molly is currently the one who wants to be on air.
Well, so you got a little noise going on there. We got a Chow mix. That's a little noise, little barking going on at times, or not?
Yes, the Chow is the big time barker, but right now she is just sitting by my foot. She's
she's your agent.
She's a herd dog, so if I ever try to leave the room, or if somebody else is trying to leave the room or come into the room, she will go nuts because you have to be in your herd, otherwise she's got a problem.
Now she's your agent. She's going to wet her beak, and she's going to get a little bit of this mybookie.ag. Mybookie.ag. She's going to wet her beak, maybe get 10% of it.
Oh yeah,
she's staying close.
She gets more than that between the mattress and the treats. Yeah, she's getting hooked up.
Right. So, what do you thought? You got kind of a crazy day going on. Jerry Jones, unbelievable. I love the man. He is a gift from the gods. But update us on what's going on with Taco and Jerry.
Taco basically said that what was his exact words? He wilted. Taco Charlton kind of wilted when he didn't have a good practice. It's a weird deal that they picked him to begin with, because I do to go back and see the reaction when they picked Taco Charlton. I'd rather not, but it wasn't good for me. It's just weird because Rod Marinelli is such a effort guy, and yet he picked a non-effort guy, and it was he was part of the guys that was like, yeah, I'll take him. That's my guy. And then he was exactly what he was in college. And it's like, what's going on? Why can't we motivate him? I don't know. You picked him.
Right. Well, he thinks he's Anthony Robbins, Rod Marinelli. I mean, he thinks he's this motivator, right? I guess.
It didn't work out, though. I mean, kudos to them. They took some dead money to not double and triple down on a mistake that they'd made. So kudos to them for moving on. And you know what? He couldn't ask for a better opportunity than Miami because they got a bunch of guys rushing the passer. It's basically me and you. Thank you, Molly.
There she is. That's great. Now, what's the Chow's name?
Stomp Face.
No.
Yeah.
Now, is it just Stomp?
That's what happened. I say Stomp because you don't want to say Stomp Face because people are like, what? like that. I named a dog when I was 24.
Stomp Face.
I was 24, and at the time, my fantasy football team name was Operation Stomp Face because I was out here taking no prisoners, and so that's what happened.
That's great. So tell me about what do you think about Jerry, how he's handling this thing with Taco, because that's the whole fun of it to me as a non-Cowboys fan.
I always enjoy when Jerry talks. The fun part is we interview him twice a week on The Fan. And the fun part is a lot of times he comes on and he has his talking points. So you can ask whatever you want. Like you could have been like, hey, Jerry, how's your afternoon? And what's going on with Randall Cobb today? And he would go, well, Taco, and he Taco did, and he will. And you're sitting there like, wait, hold on, that's not even what I asked. But he just wants, he's got a plan when he comes on the air. And so there's some rambles and but there's always just really good quotes. And I think they handled this the right way in terms of they tried really, really hard since training camp to trade Taco. They realized he had no value. And then eventually when it was time and there were injuries piling up and it was like, oh my God, you've got to activate Taco. They went, no, we never planned to, and we're going to move on from him. So, but he always makes it fun because he'll have a good quote. Taco wilting is a good quote. He said that he could wear a different pair of cowboy boots from January to June without repeating. That's how many boots Jerry has.
Wow. That's great. Yeah. What is it about Jerry though and I know he's done it forever, And obviously you guys make fun of him nonstop with the radio, especially radio in Dallas, which is beautiful. But why is Jerry Jones doing radio spots? I mean, the guy's a trillionaire. What's that about?
Why is he doing the hits?
I mean, yeah, just give me his personality profile, because that's really what I'm asking you. The personality profile that would cause someone who's a trillionaire to want to go on, and believe me, I'm a sports radio guy, I did it my whole career. But why would he want to go on AM radio and he's a trillionaire? What's that about?
FM radio, sir. FM radio.
Oh, you're FM. That's right. What am I talking about? FM radio.
105.3 The
That's
Fan.
right. AOR.
Cowboys, sir. Now, he does it because he's so good at keeping his team in the headlines. Like, you don't get to be the $5 billion franchise, or 5.5, whatever they say it's worth. Like, you don't get to be that if you're not a genius marketer. And I think he views it as twice a week, I'm going to go on there and I'm going to market our brand, and I'm going to make sure that we stay in the headlines. I think he's been incredible at doing that, not just for him and his team, but for the entire league. Like, he's been a big part. That's an alarm. He's been a big part of, like, he moved the Rams to LA. He's doing everything he can to just make sure that they're in the headlines 24/7. And it's genius. And so many people hate him. And his personality is that if you're one of those people that hate him and you saw him in a restaurant, you're like, Jerry, I just want you to know that I hate you. He'd be like, oh, wow, that's great. Come on over. Come here. And you would leave there 15 minutes later with, like, cowboy gear on and a picture with Jerry and a shot of tequila in you, and you would love Jerry Jones. So, like, he's a master of marketing.
I love it. So we're talking to Jeff Cavanaugh, 105.3 The Fan in Dallas. Let's take a look at the weekly lines from mybookie.ag, and what a day to do this. The Cowboys with this just otherworldly line, -23 now with the Dolphins. Your thoughts?
Oh, God, it went to 23.
It's a 23 right now at mybookie.ag. -23. This is a landmark moment. This is a milestone.
It was 20.5 not too long ago.
23.
23. I was getting ready to tell you that they're going to cover that spread.
Well, I mean, how are we going to poll people, or just in general, the game in general? But what's the? I want to ask you, what do you think? What, from your knowledge of the team and how they operate, would they pull Dak or Zeke and all that stuff if they blow out ahead and we're in the middle of the third quarter and it's 49-7?
At that number, I think so. I think, like, the NFL to me is way too conservative when it comes to pulling guys. I think every time that you're up by 30 in the second half, you should pull guys, but they never do. Like, quarterbacks will play until, like, the last drive of the game, as if you're going to have some high school 6 straight onside kicks and they scored touchdowns on us. But yeah, I think they will if it gets that out of hand. God, it's such a big number, but then
it's bigger than the Patriots number.
Right.
21.5.
So I looked this up the other day when the Patriots had that spread, because I looked it up. I was like, wow, is that the biggest spread in NFL history? And the answer was no. There's been 26 and 27-point spreads, and the majority of the time they've been covered. So I think, as absurd as it is, I will pick the Cowboys to cover that spread.
Now,
even when you pull your guys, I think the Patriots, they weren't even, I think, trying to score anymore, and they got to score 2 more touchdowns because Miami's such a train wreck. They just throw it to you when you're not even trying. It's absurd. Now,
is Rosen a function of the line or a function of your approach here with the of course, starting his first game for the Dolphins? What do you think of him?
I actually was a Rosen semi-fan of him coming out of college. I think, remember when David Carr came into the league and just got killed in Houston? Like, who knows what he might have Molly? I swear on everything. So, like, David Carr might have had a nice career, except that he was put behind a line that couldn't block, and, like, he got killed and it was over. Josh Rosen was on the worst team in football last year, and he's on the worst team in football this year on 2 different teams.
Right.
And so, like, I don't know. My conspiracy theory is after this season, he'll be traded to the Patriots for, like, a 5th-round pick, and then he'll be the next Tom Brady. That's what's going to happen. He's going to finally get sent somewhere where they know what they're doing, and they're going to have all that talent, and he's going to show up. But for this game, no. I think that team's such a train wreck. They can't protect him.
So how does that play into the over-under, which is 47 right now?
I will go – I'm saying they're going to go 23. They're going to cover 23. You can cover 23 at 33-14, and that puts you right at 47. I'm going to bet the under on that game because I don't think the Dolphins will score 14 points. I think the Cowboys defense, this is a week where they have something to prove because the first 2 weeks they're getting nitpicked on the number of yards they've allowed and how many sacks they haven't gotten. So I think the Cowboys against a really bad team defensively feel like they got to go out there and prove something, which of course they don't because you're going to win by 20 or 30 no matter what happens. But I do think that's the sort of guys they have with DeMarcus Lawrence. He'll be in there like they get 0. I want them to get 0. And so God, they're going to cover a 23-point spread.
Score me now. Score me on this game. Give me a score.
34-6.
34-6.
34-6.
And they're going to cover. Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to cover 34.
Unbelievable.
Oh, there is literally nothing out there. There's nothing there.
Molly's made my day though. We got to get her on the show. We got to get Stompface on the show.
Okay, we can get
Stompface made my day. Yeah, I want to see her.
Let's bring Molly in.
Oh my God. And she's just sitting there. Oh my God. What a beauty. And now, she wants no part of it. Or is she preening? She's a little bit like that Jerry Jones. She wants some airtime.
Well, yeah, give a good shaking and then here's stuff.
Oh my goodness. What a beauty. What a beautiful dog, man. That's great. That's phenomenal, man. That just made the show. That's the highlight of the show right there. Absolutely. Well, Jeff, man, I really appreciate you hopping on, man. Really enjoyed doing this with you.
All right. Appreciate you, Brooks. Have a good one, man.
All right, bud. Take care. That's Jeff Cavanaugh, 105.3 The Fan. And his Cowboys coverage is presented by mybookie.ag, where you'll double your deposit. I said double your deposit. Did you hear that? Double your deposit with the promo code Fancred, Fancred, at mybookie.ag. Coming up, we're going to talk to Doug Lesmerises of the Cleveland Plain Dealer about Urban Meyer. But now that I have an opportunity, before we talk to Doug, I want to talk about USC, talk about what I had up on Twitter about the athletic director situation. And that is that what I'm hearing is that Carol Folt, the president of USC, has put together a wish list of candidates. And that wish list includes Rick George, the current athletic director at Colorado, Rob Mullins, the current athletic director at the University of Oregon, Patrick Chun, the athletic director at Washington State, and Joe Oliva, the former athletic director at Duke. When Carol Folt was at UNC, Oliva was at Duke, and then Oliva was recently put out to pasture at LSU. But he has, from what I've heard, he may or may not be interested in the USC job. I think he's open to the possibility. And there is an ACC connection from the past when Oliva was very prominent in his role as the athletic director at Duke when Carol Folt was at the University of North Carolina serving as president there. So those are the names that I'm hearing. Now, it's interesting to note that the Washington State athletic director, Patrick Chun, is a former longtime Ohio State athletic department staffer who went to FAU to take over as AD, then went to Washington State. In the process of the machinations of Chun's career, Urban Meyer has made it known publicly at times that he likes Patrick Chun. And so the thinking is, at least from my perspective, if Chun is to get an opportunity to become the athletic director at USC, and he's only been at Washington for a very short period of time, it would be quite a coup going from FAU to Washington State to USC. But certainly nothing on Mario Cristobal, the coach at Oregon of that football program, a guy who was fired at FIU, goes to Alabama as an assistant under Nick Saban, gets demoted, then goes to Oregon as the offensive line coach, and suddenly he's the head football coach. Mario Cristobal is the head football coach at Oregon when his previous head coaching position was at FIU, Florida International, not FAU, FIU, and he was fired. So anything is possible, anything. And but now the whole point is, I was leading up to, if Patrick Chun indeed ends up USC AD, that would guarantee that Urban Meyer is going to be the next head football coach at USC. It'll be very interesting to see who gets hired, what the deal is when Carol Folt brings in that AD, how much are the trustees involved. But all indications are, and I want to emphasize this because it's very important in the context of USC, it's going to be an outsider, okay? It's not going to be someone who had a significant presence at USC in the athletic department. We already know that. Once Lynn Swann was let go, and he kind of epitomized the type of athletic director that you had in the past at USC over the past couple of decades, a figurehead, someone with no power, someone who took orders, someone who was the last to know. Lynn Swann was certainly in that category, as was Mike Garrett for a long time. Pat Hayden, a little different, but by no means was his own man at USC. The strings are being pulled by Rick Caruso on the board of trustees and Wayne Hughes from behind the scenes. Hughes, I'm hearing, isn't quite as assertive as he used to be because of his age. So he's not in the mix perhaps as much as he had been. And that's a significant part to this story. So understand that Hughes isn't necessarily the puppet master that he has been when he was donating $400 million to USC and putting Al Calling's name on a dormitory. So that's the story as far as USC goes. Now, Mark Jackson is a name that was brought up by Dan Patrick on the Dan Patrick Show yesterday, and I have since confirmed that name as also being on the wish list of Carol Folt as a possible candidate, right? But the problem that Mark Jackson has, and I think it's a deal breaker for him, I think it's a non-starter for USC and Carol Folt, who, again, herself is an outsider, as much of an outsider as you could imagine coming into the situation at USC. Mark Jackson, the AD at Villanova, previously at Syracuse, and also, of course, a staffer under Pete Carroll when Carroll was at USC. He actually worked for the New England Patriots in the past on Bill Belichick's staff and with Pete Carroll. So he's been around USC, and up until somewhat recently when he departed for Syracuse in a circuitous route, I should say, that ends up at Villanova, where he's done a good job. And from what I've heard, Mark Jackson, if he were to get an opportunity at USC as the AD, he would not hire Urban Meyer. Just as a little aside to the situation, kind of an inner conflict going on at USC, and minus an athletic director, I think people think, well, nothing's going to get done. They're not going to hire the coach. By the time an athletic director gets into place at USC, I think the seeds will have been sown as to what's going to happen. There will be a set of candidates in terms of the coach. I mean, Clay Helton could be out as early as tomorrow, depending on what happens tonight, as I mentioned on the show earlier. If there's a huge blowout, and I mean a blowout in excess of 5 touchdowns, which isn't going to happen, I know. But if Utah just destroys USC and embarrasses them tonight at the Coliseum, with Urban Meyer in attendance, I might add, and Reggie Bush, Helton's going to be out. He may not last through the bye week. He may not make it to Notre Dame, depending on what happens when USC goes up to Washington. For all we know, though, and don't be surprised, understand this. I'm not burying Clay Helton. I don't give a damn what happens with USC, right? For all I know, that they could win the rest of their games. I think they actually have the capacity to do that. It's not like their schedule is impossible. Probably the toughest game in the schedule is going to be at Notre Dame. And we're going to find out a lot about Notre Dame coming up against Georgia on Saturday. I don't think Notre Dame is that great. The defense has been terrible for Notre Dame. And, of course, Georgia has the great running offense, the great offensive line. I think that's going to be an ugly game, but we have to play the game. That's why we play them. But I want to get back to the point about USC and the AD. By the way, as I look at the comments down here, and feel free to comment on what I'm talking about here. on Fancred. I appreciate you coming in and commenting. But I get a comment from Johnson, and he says, "Isn't Rick George a Colorado alum? That's the only reason he left the Rangers to go to Colorado." All right. This is a little bit like when I reported that Jimmy Raines is targeting Bob Stoops. People took that to mean that Jimmy Raines, the super booster for Auburn, had talked to Bob Stoops, and that they were, in the process of preparing him to take over for Gus Malzahn, even though Malzahn is currently the coach. I think people conflated my report into something like that, when all I reported was that Jimmy Raines, the super booster at Auburn, was targeting Bob Stoops as a possible replacement for Gus Malzahn if Malzahn and Auburn was unable to beat Alabama this year. That's what I reported. That's what everybody went crazy over. That's how I ended up on radio stations all over the state of Alabama doing interviews the next day. But I never said that Bob Stoops had been contacted by Jimmy Raines, Johnson. What I reported here was a minute ago on this show. I've yet to mention these things on Twitter. I'm breaking this news on the show right here. Get my fingers in there on Fancred. What I'm reporting is Rick George is on the wish list. So it's a compliment to him. Does that mean he's going to be interested? Does that mean they've talked to him yet? No. I didn't say that. But I know what that wish list is at USC. I know who they're interested in. And so I can't gauge what Rick George is going to think about this, or who knows? I will say this, though. When it comes to candidates, one guy to look at and think about is Joe Oliva, because he's the guy that was responsible for turning the football program around. Ed Orgeron's been a great hire. SC fans know all about him. They could have had him. And it was Oliva who brought him in here to LSU here, but brought him into LSU. We're at USC. But Oliva, his situation was not really strange. This is the way it works. But the nature of his departure at LSU was curious in that the board of trustees at LSU, board of supervisors, said in public that the reason that they were reassigning him, essentially firing him from the AD job at LSU last year, was because he didn't attend to donors. He didn't raise enough money. In other words, he didn't kiss enough ass. Now, someone who used to be at Duke when Carol Folt was at North Carolina, and now he's at LSU, does a nice job. It wasn't like he did a bad job. He hired Will Wade, and he suspended Will Wade, as he should have. And he hired Ed Orgeron. That's been a huge hire. LSU is about to take the next step into that college football playoff pantheon. It certainly appears like that might be happening. They might be a year away. We'll see. But he's out there. He's available. And you would think a guy that gets fired for not kissing donors' asses would be somebody that USC would want to look at. He would be his own man. And, of course, he would be attendant to the president, Carol Folt. That's kind of the whole point here. And also understand, just as important, that ultimately Carol Folt and Joe Oliva work for the board of trustees, and they work for the donors. This is a private school. It's not UCLA. It's different. So ultimately, the system in the end is going to remain the same. Who calls the final shots? And to USC's credit, it's kind of like they didn't have a choice. The trustees, things have gotten so bad, they had to bring people in to give an air of propriety to the institution. But now that you brought these people in like Carol Folt, you're going to have an outsider at AD. And I actually think that, and I said this yesterday, I think it's 60-40 against that Urban Meyer gets hired. And speaking of Urban Meyer, we've got Doug Lesmerises with us from the Cleveland Plain Dealer. And you can bring him up, Cam, when you get the opportunity. Cam Smith, our producer in Boston, Sports by Brooks on Fancred. We do it weekdays, Monday through Friday. That's weekdays, starting at noon. And a guy that I have from going back to my days in Columbus at WBNS, have read forever, have appreciated his work forever. Doug Lesmerises joins us. Are you in Cleveland today, Doug?
I'm actually
in Columbus.
I'm in a lovely outdoor mall in Columbus, Brooks.
There you go. So I wanted to talk to you first, and I want to talk to you about Ohio State and Ryan Day in particular, because that's an interesting developing story that's not getting a lot of play yet, but it will. But let's talk about your story with Urban Meyer, because it's funny. I was thinking to myself in the first couple of weeks, Doug, of the season, I was watching Urban on the Fox pregame show in the studio, and I was watching his performance, and I was comparing it to when he was with ESPN after he left Florida. And my sense was at ESPN, he seemed disengaged. But at Fox, he seemed very engaged. He seemed like a very different person. And so I started to think, well, maybe he's gotten rid of this coaching bug. And then I read your article and I saw his comments. At least I interpreted that he hasn't lost that coaching bug. What do you think?
I think he's caught in between a little bit, Brooks. He has it in him. He's trying to see if he can put it to rest. And so I think both things that you mentioned there are true. And I wrote a second story after the initial one about his TV gig. And he has admitted that he didn't try very hard at ESPN because he knew it was temporary. And he said, I want to be good at TV because I know this might be my life now. And so Fox would like him to be their new face of that show for many years to come. And I think he's interested in that. But he realizes he has this part of him, the coaching bug, that is inside of him. And he has to see if he can quiet that or not. I think he's interested in quieting it. Like, can I live without coaching? He's testing that out right now. But he doesn't know the answer to that question yet. And TV is a big part of that equation. There are other things involved. But he is really trying to throw himself into the Fox gig because he does view it differently than when he, at ESPN in 2011, when he knew that was a short-time gig.
It's fascinating out here in Los Angeles, and I understand I'm kind of fueling the fire to an extent, but there's a lot of people talking about Urban Meyer beyond me, that's for sure. It's a huge national story, people following him. Arguably, it's one of the main storylines, at least as we get into the meat of the schedule, that will probably start to go away. But one of the things I think is always, at least from what I could tell, left out of the conversation when we're talking about Urban Meyer and the prospects of him going back coaching perhaps at USC is his health. To me, his health is really at the forefront of this situation. And so what do you understand his health to be?
It's the same in terms of the cyst in his brain, which he told us a year ago was the size of a fist. But at that time, that was off the record and he didn't want that reported. And now he's being more public with that. But that's how serious this thing is. People hear cyst, and sometimes you think, oh, it's like a little marble size thing. This is a big. It's in his brain.
Well, it sounds like a tumor.
I mean, in a way, it is. I mean, it's not cancerous, but it's a cyst that is there and puts pressure on things, and that's why he has headaches. That's why he has these issues. And as he said, it's the moments when those moments of tensing up on the sidelines that creates the issue. And so he has not had surgery for that. He had a surgery for that previously a couple years ago. He would like to avoid that surgery for now. So it was either surgery or lifestyle. So the cyst is still there. So then what you have to eliminate is this.
Right.
So he feels healthy now. It's kind of it's an obvious thing, but I think people need it explained. He looks great. A million people have said this. When I sat down with him, I said, "You look good." And he said, "Well, I must have looked like crap before." And it's like, well, when we were in the office with him last year, he looked terrible. I
heard that from a lot of people in Columbus that I was touching base with.
He did.
They were worried about him.
They were. And so he has not changed the basic medical condition, right? Obviously it's being treated, but what he has changed is his environment. So the change to the environment, that I'm not game planning, that I'm not stressing myself out in practice, that I'm not going crazy on the sidelines on Saturday, that's why he looks healthy. Because he's not doing that. So to immediately throw himself right back into that, the way it stands now, there's a very good chance he would have the same kind of issues because the underlying thing remains. And the thing that he said to me and he has said before is he does not think that he can coach in a way that he's not like this, that he's not, trying to bring everything out of guys in practice, and that he's not that tensed up on the sideline. So he would have to find a way to coach differently, accept that, or address it medically. But the reason it's not a problem right now is because he's not coaching.
Talking to Doug Lesmerises of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, let's go back to last year. Can you elucidate exactly why, or at least we don't necessarily know the answer to this, but from knowing him and from covering that situation, why did Urban Meyer ultimately step down?
The headaches got worse. They had been an issue, I think, in the early 2010 decade, around 11 or around 12 or 13. Then they went away for a little while. He had an issue in 2017 that cropped up again. And then in 2018, they got worse. And so he had reached the point where he was having daily headaches, and we saw him drop to his knee on the sideline during that game in 2018. And is it obviously somewhat connected to what happened with the Zach Smith situation and Urban Meyer's suspension and all those things? Yeah, the connection there is that was an additionally stressful situation that, again, he brought on himself. But the added intensity of that month, coupled with the normal intensity of day, just led him to the point where he knew he couldn't do it that way anymore. And then coupled with that, and he said this, and I believe it, he really likes Ryan Day. And so it helped him be able to step away because he didn't think he was abandoning Ohio State because they left the structure in place and he believed in the guy that they were going to hire next. So a couple things came together, but yes, it was health as the underlying issue and the additional stress on top of it that made it happen.
I want to talk about Ryan Day. That's a great story in a minute, but I want to bottom line this thing with Urban. If Urban Meyer, after the season, is offered the USC job by USC, what's he going to do?
I think right now he would say no. I think he wants to see how his life plays out for more than a year. He has his son, Nate, who is playing baseball at Cincinnati. He's only a couple hours away from that.
So Urban is in Columbus. I mean, what is his schedule? He's living in Columbus still.
He's living in Columbus. He's
right.
teaching a class at Ohio State that he goes to that classroom a couple times a week. He has a role as an assistant athletic director here. And then when I talk to Fox, as they explain, this is how most of those people do it. Reggie Bush, Matt Leinart, they live in L.A. Brady Quinn doesn't live in L.A. A lot of the NFL guys that come in on the weekends, those studio guys don't live in L.A. full time. So Urban's coming out on the weekend. If he needs to be there for the Saturday show, I think he'll fly out Friday, prep all day Friday, do the show Saturday. I know sometimes they're doing weekday stuff, but he's in Columbus full time. So his life is still in Columbus. That's his son in college. That's his two grandchildren who also live in Columbus. That's his role that continues at Ohio State. I think he would want to let this play out a little bit longer than 1 year.
Right.
He mentioned the Mack Brown situation, that Mack Brown came back after 5 years. And he's very close friends with Mack Brown. That intrigued him. So I had been in a place where I thought it was very possible Urban Meyer would not coach again. After having that interview with him and leaving his office, I'm more toward the idea that he could coach again, but I do think he will give it longer than a year because he wants to see what this life is like. And he just has some personal family stuff. I think it'd be hard for him.
You know what? Here's the thing, Doug.
Miss his son playing college baseball. It's a real thing. It's a real thing.
Well, I think one of the overriding things here is if he tells everybody in Columbus and Ohio State, his home, where his roots truly are, suddenly he's taking this USC job after suffering through this physical nightmare, and that's the justification for stepping down, perhaps. That's going to be tough on his family, you would think. That's where his roots are, and now he's going to take this job at SC almost overnight. I think that could be in play, too.
Yeah,
I mean,
a lot of real
just
stuff there.
Facilitating that delay, you know?
No, I think there is a lot of stuff there. And I think he understands that Ohio State fans are very happy with how things have worked out.
That'll make it easier, perhaps, right?
Well, it would, but also, you know, if we're going down this road, there's a lot of things that are in place at Ohio State right now. The people that worked for Urban Meyer, who have retained their jobs at Ohio State, that most people assume would go with Urban if Urban goes somewhere else. And so now you're pulling people out of Ohio State. You left Ohio State because of a health thing, and you're back in only a year. I just think he understands that his Ohio State legacy is important to him. And I think maybe coming back to coaching after 2 or 3 or 5 years would affect that legacy differently than coming back after 1 year.
So let's talk about Ryan Day at Ohio State. What's your read on that situation?
He's this new generation of coach that everybody wants. This, the Sean McVay offensive guru model. As Ryan Day pointed out in the spring, he was offered the Tennessee Titans offensive coordinator job for 2018. And when he turned that down, the Titans hired Matt LaFleur, and Matt LaFleur is now the Green Bay Packers head coach. So does that automatically mean Ryan Day could be the Green Bay Packers head coach? No, but that's the kind of path that he's in, right? I mean, he was an NFL coach for 2 years with Chip Kelly. Chip Kelly is absolutely his mentor. He's from that school of offense, and he's just a sharp offensive mind. He just turned 40, and it's really working out at Ohio State in part because Urban Meyer left things in really good shape. The recruiting was in good shape. The structure of the rest of the program was in good shape. They have 2 recruiting classes. The guys who are their sophomores and juniors right now were the number 2 recruiting classes in the country. They have great players here. He stepped into a great position, but he's also doing a really good job, and you can see his offensive mind at work.
What about Justin Fields? I'm hearing people are 50-50 on him. They can't really tell yet. What should we expect from him?
I had questions about him just in terms of taking care of the ball. The thing you have to do is just wipe Dwayne Haskins from your mind, the way Ohio State threw it last year. Dwayne Haskins had 50 touchdown passes. Justin Fields is not going to have 50 touchdown passes, but he's played really well. He's been in control of the offense. They haven't been tested because they haven't played anybody yet. Justin Fields is better than I thought that he would be. I just expected some bumps. He hasn't had many bumps yet, but he is one of those guys who can throw it and run it, and he looks really good so far.
Doug, I can't thank you enough. Phenomenal information, man. Great job. Thank you for stopping by.
Anytime. Appreciate you, Brooks. Good luck.
That's Doug Lesmerises of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. He's been around a long time. You'd never know. It looks pretty young, but I've read him forever. Well-known guy and a fixture in media in the state of Ohio, in Cleveland, and, of course, in Columbus, where he joined us from today with Ohio State football on everybody's mind, Urban Meyer. And, amazing listening to him talk about Urban Meyer. He literally is kind of, tinkered with the idea that I had that Meyer would be open to jumping in right now. And I think the way that Doug laid out Urban Meyer's roots, and that's where he's from, and that's where his family is, and they're still there. And he's got children there, and he's got his son in Cincinnati. And so you're going to tell me, in the aftermath of Zach Smith, and of course he's got this, I guess, this cyst or this brain thing going on. Forgive me, I'm a little dubious about the seriousness of that. It sounds awfully serious. Something the size of your fist in your brain. For me personally, that's kind of a tough sell, especially with his background going back to Florida. What happened there? That's seemingly going away. All right. A little dubious of all this, but not discounting that he wasn't in pain or has a problem or there could be an issue. But to me, that should be at the forefront of this whole conversation as it pertains to Urban Meyer. But I'll say this much. When you talk about him taking a job immediately, and this thing's going to come open immediately, there's no doubt. The Helton job, he's not coming back. I would be flummoxed. Now, if they run the table, though, I think he will. If they only lose 2 games, who knows? And they look impressive, and they finish strong, and they beat Notre Dame, SC, who knows? I haven't weighed in on that. I'm not saying that he's doomed, but I am saying if they get blown out by over 5 touchdowns tonight at home against Utah on national television in front of the whole world, he's fired. That is what I'm saying. That's what I'm hearing. But getting back to Urban, when you think about he ups and leaves Ohio State, he's got family there, but he still lives in Columbus, teaching a class. But there's still very much a connection there. And I think the connection is there. It all makes sense now. It's because of his family, in my opinion. His extended family, his immediate family, living in the state of Ohio, right? And now he's going to go and take the USC job almost overnight. That would be really tough on his family. And so when you hear Doug talk about Mac Brown, now it's making sense, right? But that doesn't lend itself to USC. Now, does it? I think he's a very pragmatic guy, Urban Meyer. And so when you look at the current situation, he's probably not going to get a better situation to go into than USC because of the recruiting ground here, the existing talent, which isn't overwhelming, but it's a talented roster, right? He's got an infrastructure here. Obviously, SC is a blue blood program if there ever was one. So it's a great program, and the conference is brutal. The teams in the conference right now, particularly horrible. Low-hanging fruit, much like the Big Ten, and you saw what he did with the Big Ten. He was unable to do that for an extended period at Florida, and I'm of the belief that Nick Saban, as he was coming on at Alabama, this is when Saban was on his initial rise. That's what chased Urban Meyer, in my opinion. That's what caused those heart palpitations to present themselves. Let's put it that way. I keep saying that, but I don't think it's a coincidence that Florida suddenly was being usurped in its dominance and power in the SEC by Alabama at the exact moment that all of a sudden that health problem came up. And then he left. Then he quit. So, fascinating information about Urban Meyer. This is going to be one of the dominant storylines of college football, at least this season. And of course, Urban Meyer has willfully placed himself right in the middle of it and promoted it. And Fox Sports is extremely enthusiastic. And why wouldn't they be? The fact that there are people inside Fox Sports that are affiliated with USC and want to see Urban Meyer as the coach, that doesn't hurt either, right? So I'm going to have the popcorn out tonight for Utah USC. I would imagine if you're watching this, you probably will too. I thank you for joining us. We do this every weekday, starting at noon Eastern time. And for our producer, Cam Smith in Boston, I'm Brooks Melchior in Los Angeles, saying so long. And this has been Sports by Brooks on Fancred.